So this is actually a FRQ that kind of deals with like lethal dose and stuff like that. So I thought that we could talk through this FRQ a little bit to give you an example of how they could give you this information on the AP exam, and you'll see that this is basically a LD-50 lab with brine shrimp. If that, I don't know if that maybe sounds familiar to y'all. If you've maybe been working on the lab this week, right? So a lot of times there are some kind of classic experiments that they reference on the AP exam, and this is one of them. And that's why I really suggested that you guys actually like conduct a lab if you can, rather than just using the data on the lab paper, because a lot of times, if you actually do the lab, I feel like you'll get a better idea of what's going on, and you'll remember it better than if you just take data that you just got on a worksheet or whatever. So in this experiment, we're testing the toxicity of copper sulfate, and we're using brine shrimp to do that. So we're going to put the solution in Petri dishes, and we'll put 100 brine shrimp in each dish. Okay. After 48 hours, the number of brine shrimp that have died are counted and recorded, and the results of this experiment are shown in the table below. Okay, so now they want us to draw a curve. Okay, so we have less than 0.0001. We have 10 dead brine shrimp. So I'm just going to put, let me see, I'll put like a dot right here. And then at 0.01, we still have 10 dead brine shrimp. And then at 0.01, we have 20. And then at 0.1, we have 55. So there's 40, 50, 55, halfway between 50 and 60. At 1, we have 90. And at 10, we have 100. So you can see this graph is giving us that shape, right? So if we have 100 brine shrimp, right, our LD-50 is going to be where 50. So it's going to be right here. So it's going to be between 0.01 and 0.1. Okay, so that would be our LD-50. Now, this part of the question. So let's say you didn't know how to do the graph. That graph was just confusing. It has all these weird lines. I don't know what to do with that. Let's go to part B. Maybe we can get some points here, right? So it says explain the meaning of the term LD-50. What is the LD-50 concentration of CuSO4 for brine shrimp? Okay, so let's explain. So the LD-50 is the concentration at which half of the test organisms So we want to write something like that. Okay. Then it says, what is the LD-50 concentration of CuSO4 for brine shrimp? Okay, so let's go back to our little graph that we drew. Okay, now I drew this really fat line, so it's hard to see. Okay, so I'm going to make my line a little thinner. So I still have it. So it looks like we're right here. Okay, so it's between 0.01 and 0.1, somewhere in between there. Okay. I haven't looked at this close enough to see what these different lines mean. So we'll just put let's do that. The brine shrimp is almost, we'll just put that, okay? Now let's go to the next slide. Okay, so this one says, explain the meaning of the term threshold level of toxicity. What is the threshold level of toxicity of CuSO4 for brine shrimp? Label the point on the graph. Okay, so the threshold level is usually the level of below which there's no effect. So okay, and then it says label this point on the graph. So we need to go back to our graph and we need to look for our threshold level. Okay, now you can see some shrimp died at all the concentrations, right? So the threshold level, because of that, we're going to put it right here. Okay, because there's nothing below that. Okay, but if there was like a 0, let's say, for example, that the graph actually ended up looking something like this. Okay, when we start having an effect right here, it starts curving upwards, then we could call that the threshold level. But we're already above 0 at our very lowest number, so we just have to use that. Okay, so do that. Okay, now let's do D. Okay, so now we need to provide an argument for extending toxicity results to humans and one argument against doing so. So like we need to say, we need, on one hand, we need to say like a pro, okay, why we should do this, and then on another hand, we should say like a con. Okay, so what is a good reason to extend these results to humans? Okay, well, we could say something like it's illegal to do these tests on humans. So this is all we have. This is all the data we have to make an informed decision. And then for a con, you could say something like brine shrimp or arthropods. And you don't have to, specifically mention arthropods, which are invertebrates. And are different physiologically, right? Their physiology is different than human physiology. They're not even vertebrates like we are, right? It's not even like we're doing this on a cat, right? We're doing it on like a bug, basically, right? So this is kind of, what you can say in that regards. Okay, so this is one argument for it, one argument against. And so that's the last thing I had for you guys today, but I planned, but I do want to, now that I'm thinking about it, we've been working on these FRQs, I want to talk to you guys about, I don't want that, that's physics. I want to talk about some differences between, let's say if they ask you for something that is economic. See what is, oh, there you go. So, so what, economic versus societal versus environmental. Environmental. Okay. So, an economic, like on an FRQ, they'll say give an economic reason or an economic advantage or disadvantage. Okay, so for economic, it must relate back to money. So if we're talking about, let's say, I think there was an FRQ about, it said like give an economic reason why eating locally is good. And people would say less fossil fuels use. Well, that's not really economic, writing it like that. Okay, in order to make it economic, you have to say less of fossil fuels used, which costs less money, or which saves farmers or consumers okay, you've got to relate it back to money somehow in order for it to be economic. Okay, now let's talk about societal. Societal, that's like society as a whole. So we could say, we must, society as a whole. So you could say, um, less sickness from eating fresh vegetables, which cuts down on healthcare needs, or something like that. Okay. And then environmental has to relate to the environment. Um, so the way I usually think about it is outside. It has to relate to something outside. Okay. So you could say, you could do the same thing, less fossil fuel use, which reduces greenhouse gas emissions. Right? Okay, do you see how we, like for economic and environmental, we use the same thing, less fossil fuels, but then for economic, we tied it to money, but for environmental, we tied it to something outside, like greenhouse gas emissions. Okay, so that's how you can tell. That's the difference between the two. Okay, I've seen um, a lot of these get confused on FRQs on your actual FRQ and on the test as well. So I wanted to chat about that.